First, to review, you remember what I said about functions, right? It's like Vegas, what happens in the function stays in the function. We're going to go even deeper into that today and what that means. But if you remember, what we use to get information into the function are called parameters. And when we want information out of the function, we use return values. And so just to remind you quickly of what that looks like, right? So if I have a function that I define called say hello, and let's say that function doesn't do anything except say hello world, okay? That doesn't have any parameters and it doesn't have any return values. It's a very simple function. All it does is print hello world. So if I say hello, when I call that function, it will do that one time. There you go. If I say hello twice, it does it twice, and so on. So that is a simple function. Now, if I want to put information into this, like if I want to say hello to a specific person, then I might use a parameter. And I might say strname is a parameter that I'm going to use inside that function. And instead of world, I'm going to use strname as a placeholder. So now I have a function that takes one parameter and it does something. It still doesn't return any values. But now when I call that function, I'm required to give it a string that it can then use. Also, please remember that strname only lives in that function. Outside of that function, if I try to call strname, right, strname like that, okay, I don't want this. Don't help me out. Okay, so if I, outside of that, try to access that value, you can see I get an error because it doesn't live outside that function. So again, the Vegas principle says what happens in the function stays in the function. So if I run that, now I can say hello to whoever I want, and it'll put that in there, right? So that is how a parameter works. Now, when I define the function, I'm defining a parameter, and I'm using that parameter here inside that code. When I call the function, does anybody remember what it's called? What the car that parks in the parking space is called? You might have it with your best friend or your spouse. It's an argument, right? Right. So the argument is what goes into the parameter. So remember, the parameter is kind of like the parking space in the parking lot, and the arguments are like the cars that park inside the spaces. So every time I have a parameter defined, I have to give it an argument when I call the function. So now, this function takes parameters but does not have any return values. Let's change that. So I'm going to say str greeting equals this f string, and I'm going to return str greeting. So now I have a function, a custom function, that takes a parameter and returns a value. It doesn't actually print anything. So if I just say print, or if I just say hello, and say that, you can see it doesn't do anything because inside that function, it doesn't have any print statements. So what this is doing is it's returning something. So if I want to capture that in a variable, I can do that, and then I can print that variable, just like that. And now, I give that, when I call this function, I'm giving it this parameter, or this argument. The argument goes into the parameter here, gets put into that string, and then it gets returned. Then it gets put into that variable as a container. And then finally, we print that value at the end. So that's a function that uses both parameters and return values. Now I can do something like this. Now this function takes a parameter, does something, and then returns a value. So that's the line printed from inside the function, and this is the line printed using the results of the function. So we can have all of those combinations are valid. Now, one thing that you need to keep in mind is that if I have a line of code after the return value in my function, that will never get executed. That's why it's underlined in yellow right now. That code, the print statement making your custom greeting, it won't cause an error necessarily, but it won't ever get executed because as soon as Python encounters that return statement, it stops. It'll exit that function just like break causes us to exit a loop. Return causes that function to end and it returns whatever value it has. So if I run this, it says, hello, Bill. You can see this code is never run. So just something to be aware of as you make functions.